I always figured love was something you had to work at, something that'd get deeper and tougher the more effort you poured in. For the last decade, I stuck to that idea, putting my all into my marriage with grit and heart. Amelia, my wife, meant the world to me. She was my everything. She had this quiet kind of beauty, soft brown eyes that used to catch me off guard, a shy little smile that'd kick my pulse into overdrive, and a voice that wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I shaped my whole life around her, dead sure we were in it together, a solid duo ready to tackle whatever crap life slung our way. But it only took one night, one lousy eavesdropped chat, to smash that world to pieces. That evening wasn't anything special, just another day winding down. I'd dragged myself home from work a bit later than usual, beat but still itching to see Amelia. The house hit me with that lavender and vanilla vibe. Those candles she was crazy about always made it smell like some cozy bakery. I kicked my shoes off, yanked my tie loose, and was about to holler for her when her voice floated in from the living room. At first, I thought she was just yakking with a buddy. Her tone was easy, breezy. Then I caught my name slipping out. Gabriel doesn't have a clue. I'm so done with him. I stopped dead. A chill crawled through me, locking me in place. Every tiny thing he does gets under my skin. He's so boring, so stuck in his ways. It's like I can't breathe anymore. Her words crashed into me like a freight train, heavy and brutal. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, blotting out whatever came next. I kept hoping I'd heard wrong, that it was some dumb joke or mix-up. But the irritation in her voice, that worn-out edge of a truth she'd bottled up too long, was unmistakable. I should have marched right in there and faced her down, asked her what the hell she meant, why she'd say that. But nope, I just stood there in the hallway, lurking in the dark, clutching the door frame like it'd keep me from falling apart. Then her voice dropped low, and her next line broke me wide open. I haven't been in love with him for years. I don't know how to walk away. He's steady, dependable, but I'm sick of dependable. My chest squeezed tight, felt like I couldn't suck in air for a second. The woman I'd given 10 years of my life to, the one I'd worshipped, saw me as some kind of dead weight, a trap she couldn't shake. I don't even know how long I stood there, drowning under those words like they were pulling me underwater. Part of me wanted to storm in, yell for answers, make her feel the gut punch she'd landed without even knowing I was listening. Another part wanted to vanish, wipe out the last decade and act like I'd never heard a thing. But what I ended up doing? Something I didn't think I had the guts for. I turned, shuffled to our bedroom, and snatched a duffel bag from the closet. My hands were shaking like crazy as I jammed clothes in there, enough for a few days, maybe a week if I stretched it. My brain was blank, just static, while my body ran on autopilot, stuffing socks and shirts like a robot. Zipping it up, I caught sight of our wedding picture on the dresser, Amelia grinning ear to ear, arms slung around me, her eyes shining with love and big promises. I stared at it, feeling like the world's biggest idiot. Had she been faking it all along? Was she just biding her time for a way out? I gritted my teeth and ripped my eyes away. Heading back down the hall, I heard her laugh, light and free, like she hadn't just carved my heart out with a rusty spoon. I paused, gripping that duffel bag, then stepped into the living room. She was sprawled on the couch, phone glued to her ear, smiling like nothing was wrong. That smile dropped fast when she clocked me standing there, bag in hand. Gabriel? She blinked at me, confusion wrinkling her face. What's going on? I didn't say a word at first, just let the quiet hang there, watching her squirm under my stare. I wanted her to feel it, that split second when she'd figure out I'd heard it all, when the fake wall she'd built around her secret life would collapse. Then I said the only thing that made sense right then, hope you track down whatever it is you want, Amelia. Her mouth popped open a little, but nothing came out, no defense, no excuse. I didn't stick around for her to find the words. I spun around, hit the front door, and walked out. Didn't have a clue where I was headed or what was next. All I knew was I was done being her fallback plan. The night air slapped me hard as I stepped out, but it barely registered. My head was spinning, my pulse hammering so loud it drowned out everything else. I didn't have a clue where I was headed, just knew I had to get moving. I slid into my car, wrapping my hands around the steering wheel, till my knuckles went pale. A shaky breath slipped out of me, but it didn't calm a damn thing. Amelia's voice kept looping in my skull like some twisted rerun I couldn't shut off. I haven't loved him in years. I don't know how to walk away. I should have been pissed, red-hot mad, but instead, this gut-wrenching emptiness sank into me, heavy and cold, making me second-guess every truth I'd ever held on to. 10 years, gone, just poof. I'd poured a whole decade into loving a woman who saw me as nothing but a cozy fallback plan. The kicker. I never saw it sneaking up on me, not even a hint. I glared out at the road, my eyes fuzzing up a little. Crashing at a buddy's place wasn't an option, most of them were our friends, and I wasn't about to spill my guts at their door with a duffel bag slung over my shoulder in the dead of night. Mom and Dad were states away, and a hotel. That'd just hammer home how real this mess was. I wasn't ready for that punch yet. So, without overthinking it, I hit the gas and started rolling. The streets were deserted, streetlights throwing long, creepy shadows across the asphalt. My grip on the wheel tightened as I ran through every second of our marriage in my head, hunting for the warning signs I'd been too dumb to catch, like how Amelia quit reaching for my hand over time, or the way she'd let out those quiet sighs when I rambled about work, or how she'd gotten glued to her phone lately, grinning at messages I wasn't in on. Was she just waiting for me to pull the plug all this time? I ended up in an empty lot by the waterfront, my chest heaving like my thoughts were crushing me. Out there, the waves smashed against the shore, steady, almost hypnotic, totally out of sync with the tornado tearing me up inside. I cut the engine and slumped forward, pressing my forehead into the wheel. For the first time since those words hit me, I let it all crash in, the sting of betrayal, the ache of a busted heart, the embarrassment of realizing my wife had been playing a role for God knows how long. I clamped my jaw shut, forcing down the knot in my throat. Part of me wanted to believe we could fix this, that maybe she was just venting some passing frustration. But those weren't angry words, they were raw, real, straight from her gut. She was already gone, I'd just been too blind to notice till now. My phone buzzing snapped me out of it, lighting up the dark with Amelia's name. I stared at it for what felt like forever. Then, even though I knew better, I picked up. Gabriel? Her voice came through, shaky, like she wasn't sure what to say. Where'd you go? I didn't answer, just let the quiet stretch out, thick and choking. She let out a breath. Listen, I don't know what's up with you, but... I heard you, I said, low and calm. A beat, then softer, huh? I heard it all, Amelia. My tone stayed steady, even with the chaos swirling inside me. Every word. The other end went dead quiet, loud in its own way. She stumbled. Gabriel, I didn't mean it like. Don't bullshit me. Her breath caught sharp. Another stretch of silence, then she finally asked, where are you at? I could have told her, could have handed her the chance to patch this up, throw out some excuse, or plead for a do-over. But I wasn't in the mood for her spin. So I hung up. And right then, for the first time in years, I let it sink in. I'd spent 10 years pouring my soul into a woman who didn't give a damn back, and I wasn't wasting one more minute on her. Sleep didn't come that night. After cutting her off, I just sat there in my car, eyes locked on the black ocean sprawled out ahead, endless and deep. The waves kept pounding the shore, relentless, unbothered by the storm chewing me up inside. My hands stayed clamped on the wheel, knuckles still white, my whole body stiff like I was waiting for a hit that had already landed. Eventually, I glanced at my phone again, 8 missed calls, 3 texts. The first was short and to the point, Amelia, where are you? The second had a little more panic in it, Amelia, Gabriel, come home. We gotta talk this out. The third one twisted my stomach into knots. Amelia, you're overreacting. Let's handle this like grown-ups. Dramatic. Dramatic. I let out a sharp, bitter chuckle, shaking my head in disbelief. I just caught my wife admitting she couldn't stand the sight of me, that she hadn't felt a damn thing for me in years, and somehow I was the one overreacting. She'd boiled our whole marriage down to some annoying chore, and now she wanted to chat like it was no big deal, just a little mix-up. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and scrubbed my hands over my face, feeling the tiredness start to seep in. Sleep wasn't happening, though. My body was wired on a mix of adrenaline and raw hurt, my brain stuck on repeat, digging up every clue I'd brushed off, every red flag I'd been too stubborn to spot. Man, I'd been so clueless. But even with all that hitting me, there was this weird, dead calm settling over me, like the worst had already gone down, and now I just had to deal with the fallout. As the first streaks of morning light peeked over the horizon, I fired up the car again. I couldn't just sit there forever, stewing. I didn't have a plan, but one thing was crystal clear, I wasn't heading back home. So, I drove. No clue where I was going, just let the road roll out ahead of me, putting miles between me and the life that didn't even feel like mine anymore. I cruised past quiet streets, the world waking up slow around me, totally oblivious to the fact that mine had just blown apart. My stomach finally growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten in who knows how long, so I pulled into the lot of this little diner on the edge of town. It wasn't my usual kind of stop, beat-up neon sign buzzing, half the parking spaces empty, the air thick with grease and coffee, but right then, I just needed a spot to sit down and catch my breath. I shuffled inside and plopped down at the counter, my whole body feeling like it weighed a ton. A waitress rolled up, middle-aged, with worn-out eyes but a warm smile. She poured me a coffee without even asking, like she could tell just from my face that I was running on fumes. "Rough night, huh?" she said, cocking an eyebrow. I let out a puff of a laugh, barely there. "Yeah, you could put it that way." She didn't dig deeper, just gave a little nod, slid a menu my way, and left me alone. I was grateful for that. The last thing I needed was to dump my mess on some stranger when I couldn't even sort it out myself. I sat there forever, staring at that menu without really reading it. Everything around me felt far off, like I was stuck behind glass, the hum of other folks talking, the clatter of forks and knives, some old tune crackling through a radio I didn't know. It was all so normal, like nothing had changed, even though my life had cracked open just hours ago. I should have been at home right now, rolling out of bed next to Amelia, brewing coffee, kicking off another regular day. Instead, I was parked in this rundown joint, trying to figure out how to glue my world back together when I didn't even know where the pieces were. Then my phone buzzed again, another text, "Amelia, Gabriel, please at least let me explain." Explain what, exactly? That she'd been faking it for years? That every "I love you" was just hot air? That she'd been too chicken to leave, so she let me keep playing the sucker who adored her? I clenched my teeth and jammed the phone back in my pocket. I wasn't ready for her excuses, not now, maybe not ever. For once, I had to think about me, what I wanted, what I needed, and I didn't have the faintest idea where to begin. I lingered in that diner for what felt like ages, my coffee turning cold, my thoughts spinning in circles down a dark hole. Last night's weight sat heavy on my chest, but this numbness was creeping in, softening the jagged edges of my pain. I should have been a wreck, but instead, I just felt hollowed out. The waitress swung by again at some point. She didn't bug me about ordering, just sized me up for a second before topping off my mug. "You look like a guy who could use some food," she said. "Pancakes or eggs?" I blinked at her, caught off guard. "Pancakes." She gave a quick nod, jotted it down, and headed off. I didn't have the steam to argue, just sat there, catching my reflection in the window, hair all over the place, shirt crumpled from a night in the car, eyes sunk in and empty. I hardly knew the guy staring back at me. The door jingled behind me as somebody new strolled in, but I didn't bother glancing back. My eyes stayed glued to the window, tracking the sun inching up into the sky. Then a voice hit me, one I knew all too well. Gabriel? My gut sank like a stone. I turned slow, already steeling myself, and there she was, Amelia. She stood by the entrance, arms hugged tight across her chest, hair all mussed up like she'd bolted out the door without a second thought. Her face was a puzzle, caught somewhere between ticked off and frantic. For a beat, we just stared at each other. The diner went dead quiet all of a sudden, like everybody in there was holding their breath, waiting for the show to start. I let out a long breath, my fingers clamping down harder on my coffee mug. How'd you track me down? She edged forward a step, cautious. You always hit the road when you're worked up. I figured you'd land somewhere low-key. She flicked her eyes around the place, lips pressing tight. Didn't peg you for a diner guy, though. I didn't bite, just stayed quiet. She sighed, shifting her stance like she was fishing for the right way to kick this off. You just vanished, Gabriel. I woke up, and poof, you weren't there. I didn't vanish, I said, keeping my tone level. I walked out. She flinched. Good, she should. I nodded toward the empty stool across from me. Well, you're here now. Go ahead, lay it out. She paused, like she hadn't banked on me giving her the floor. But after a second, she slid onto the seat, hands folding together on the table. She looked jittery, something I wasn't used to seeing from her. I didn't plan on you overhearing that, she let slip. I snorted. What, just blowing off steam? Yeah, she said, leaning in a touch. Look, Gabriel, every couple hits bumps. Sometimes you blurt stuff out you don't really mean right then. I cocked my head. How long's this bump been dragging on? Her mouth opened, but she froze up. I gave a slow nod, didn't need her to spell it out. You said you haven't loved me in years, Amelia. That's not a bump. That's not some heat-of-the-moment slip. That's the real deal. Her gaze darted off, guilt flickering over her face like a neon sign. I swallowed hard, that numb shell in my chest starting to splinter. So all this time, what, you've just been biding your time? Waiting for me to bail first? For some easy out? No, she shot back quick. I wasn't waiting, she rubbed her temples, blowing out a sharp breath. I didn't know how to bring it up. Didn't know how to tell me you're done loving me. My voice stayed soft, but there was an edge to it, hard as nails. So you let me keep at it, let me think we were solid. She cringed. I didn't want it to turn out like this. A dry laugh slipped out of me. Yeah, well, tough luck, it did. Right then, the waitress swung by, plopping a stack of pancakes in front of me. She shot a quick glance at Amelia, barely a half second, then scooted off without a peep. The air between us was thick, choking. Amelia's eyes followed my fork as I picked it up, her hands balling into fists. So what's next? I didn't jump to answer, just took a slow bite, letting the quiet drag out. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. I don't have it figured out yet, I owned up. But I'm done being your safety net. Her face went white. For the first time since those words gutted me, I felt like I was the one holding the reins. Amelia sat there across from me, her expression a blank slate, but I knew her too damn well. She was rattled, grasping at straws. This wasn't how she'd pictured it playing out. Maybe she thought I'd crumble, grovel for answers, claw to patch up something already smashed to bits. But I wasn't feeding into that script. I wasn't about to be the guy begging for scraps of affection. Her mouth popped open like she had something to say, but then she second-guessed it. Instead, she grabbed a sugar packet off the table, fiddling with it, dodging my stare. I watched her close, after 10 years hitched, I'd picked up on her tells, the lip bite when she was spinning a lie, the finger tap when she was holding something back. Those quirks used to charm me. Now, they just pissed me off, knowing I still had her pegged. She let out a heavy sigh, her shoulders sagging like the fight was draining out of her. "I'm not proud of what came out of my mouth," she confessed. "But you've gotta believe I wasn't out to stab you in the back." I took another slow bite of my pancakes, the taste barely registering. "Then what were you aiming for?" She frowned, squirming a little in her seat. "I don't even know. I guess I've been feeling trapped for a while, like one morning I woke up and realized I'm not the same girl who said, 'I do,' all those years ago." She huffed out a quick breath. "And yeah, that's not fair to you, I get that. I should have opened my mouth about it ages ago, but Gabriel, you've never been great at picking up the hints. You just roll along like everything's peachy." I locked eyes with her. "That's because you let me think it was." She flinched but didn't push back. I set my fork down and leaned in a bit. "Here's a question for you, Amelia. If I hadn't caught that little chat, would you have ever clued me in?" Her gaze slid away, answer enough right there. I tightened my jaw, my stomach churning like it was tying itself in knots. I'd been hitched to a woman who was cool with faking it, someone who stuck around not because she cared but because it was simpler than walking out. The real gut punch. I still couldn't tell if she'd have ever made a move to leave, or if she'd have just sat there, miserable, quietly hating me, till we were too old to do a damn thing about it. She rubbed her temples, looking worn out. "I don't know what you want me to tell you." I eased back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. "That's the whole problem, Amelia. You never have." For a stretch, we just sat there, neither of us saying a word. The diner buzzed around us, plates clattering, folks chatting low, that old jukebox spitting out a scratchy tune in the corner. Then she threw me a curveball, reached across the table and laid her hand on mine. I couldn't help but look at her then, and for the first time since this mess kicked off, I saw something real in her face, not guilt or sorry, but straight-up fear. "I don't want to lose you," she murmured, voice so soft I barely caught it. I blinked, thrown off. Of all the lines I'd braced for, that wasn't on the list. I slid my hand out from under hers, sizing her up. "You don't want to lose me. But you don't love me." She swallowed hard, throat bobbing. "I don't know. I'm not sure what we've got left is love anymore, Gabriel. But I don't want it to crash and burn like this." A dry chuckle slipped out of me. "You don't want it to end 'cause it's ugly, 'cause it's a hassle, not 'cause you actually want me around." She didn't argue, that was the last straw, the final hammer drop. I let out a long breath and shoved my plate aside. "I can't decide what's worse," I admitted, "that you don't love me anymore, or that you'd have let me keep pouring my heart out anyway." Her eyes got shiny, but I wasn't feeling sorry for her, not this time. I dug into my pocket, pulled out some cash, and dropped it on the table before getting up. Amelia stood too, peering up at me like she was scrambling to figure out how to stop the train from derailing. "Gabriel," she started, her voice cracking, "can we at least?" "Nope," I cut her off sharp. "We can't." She sucked in a quick breath, but I didn't hang around to see her face. I turned, breezed past the counter, and stepped out into the morning sun. I didn't know where I was headed, but one thing was locked in tight, I wasn't going back home. The second I hit the outside, the air felt different, like a weight had shifted, even if it was just a little. The sun was climbing higher now, warming my skin, but inside, I was still ice cold. I walked over to my car, hand wrapping around the door handle, but I didn't climb in, not yet. I just stood there, staring at the guy in the window reflection. I barely knew him, worn-out eyes, scruff I hadn't bothered shaving, shoulders slumped like I was hauling something too big to carry. Was this what a decade with Amelia had whittled me down to, a guy so used to being sidelined he didn't even clock when he was just being put up with instead of cherished? I gritted my teeth, shoving the thought out of my head. I couldn't let myself spiral down that path, not yet. A noise behind me jolted me stiff, footsteps crunching, then her voice cutting through. "Gabriel, don't just walk off like this." I squeezed my eyes shut for a second before spinning around. There she was, Amelia, standing just outside the diner, arms locked tight across her chest, her face a messy mix of panic and irritation. "I don't get it," she said, shaking her head like she was lost. "Why are you acting like this is the end? We can hash it out, work through it." "Work through what?" My voice came out low, but it carried some heft. "How to fake it for another half-decade. How to keep you comfy while you're secretly miserable." She flinched, her throat working as she swallowed hard. "I never meant to cut you deep," she murmured, barely audible. "But you did anyway." I blew out a sharp breath, raking a hand through my hair. "You think this is just about what I overheard last night, Amelia? It's the years you treated me like part of the decor, the years you let me buy into a lie I didn't even question." She bit her lip, eyes sliding off to the side. "I wasn't trying to be vicious. Nah, you were just keeping things cozy for yourself." Her head jerked up, a spark flaring in her eyes. "And you? You think you were Mr. Perfect? Like I was the only one who wasn't happy?" A harsh chuckle slipped out of me. "Nope. But at least I wasn't feeding you a load of crap." That landed like a punch. She flinched again, jaw locking tight. For a second, I thought she'd fire back, but then her shoulders sagged, and just like that, she looked tiny, smaller than I'd ever seen her. For years, I'd put her on a pedestal, the heart of everything I'd built my life around. But standing there in that nowhere diner lot, it hit me like a ton of bricks. She wasn't my whole world. She was just a piece of it, one that didn't fit anymore. She sucked in a shaky breath. "So what happens now?" I flicked my eyes to my car, then back to her. "Now I figure out who I am without you in the picture." Her breath caught, and for the first time since this mess blew up, I saw it click. I wasn't waiting for her to patch things up, wasn't letting her call the shots, wasn't sticking around. She didn't get a say this time. I didn't hang around for her to reply, just turned, yanked the car door open, and dropped into the driver's seat. As the engine growled to life, I caught her in the rearview, rooted to the spot in the parking lot, staring after me. Guilt tried to sneak in for a split second, and I almost let it take hold. But then I hit the gas, and I kept my eyes straight ahead. I drove with no real plan, just racked up miles, the engine's hum filling the void where Amelia's voice used to sit. The world whipped by in a blur, little towns, stretches of highway, trees swaying in the breeze. I wasn't bolting, but I wasn't ready to park it either. The farther I went, the heavier it all sank into my chest, not just the heartbreak, but the years I'd spent blind, telling myself love could carry it all, that grit and loyalty could fill the gaps where passion and honesty had dried up. I'd been living a daydream, and now that it had shattered, I didn't have a clue who I was without it. Somewhere down the line, I rolled into a gas station on the outskirts of some podunk town. It was like a time capsule, faded sign dangling over the pumps, a lone vending machine humming and rusting by the door. I climbed out, stretching my creaky legs, the chilly air biting at my worn-out skin. Inside, the clerk didn't even glance up as I snagged a water bottle and a protein bar. But on my way to pay, somebody else caught my attention, a guy near the back, flipping through a magazine. Older, maybe pushing 60, with rough hands and a furrowed brow like he was deep in thought. Something about him rang a bell, though I couldn't pin it down. Then, like he felt me staring, he looked up. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, there was a spark, like he recognized me too. He gave a slow nod, as if he knew exactly the kind of hell I was wading through. "You look like you've been on the road a while," the guy said, his voice gravelly with years behind it. I paused before giving a nod. "Yeah, trying to shake something off my tail." A rough chuckle slipped out of me. Or maybe just chasing down where I'm supposed to end up. He dropped the magazine and propped himself against the counter. That's the deal with walking away, he said. You don't always have a map, but sometimes not knowing's the sweet spot. His words landed harder than I'd figured they would, sinking in deep. I paid for my stuff and stepped back out into the open air, that old man's voice still rattling around in my skull. I hadn't looked at it like that, too caught up in what I'd lost to even think about what might be waiting ahead. I slid into my car, hands wrapping tight around the wheel, eyes fixed on the stretch of road in front of me. For the first time in forever, nobody owned my time. I didn't have to be the guy clocking in right on the dot, setting out plates for dinner, or checking if Amelia needed something before I even thought about me. For the first time in years, I was untied, free. It spooked me a little, sure, but damn if it didn't feel good too. I yanked out my phone, thumbing past Amelia's unread texts without a second glance. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts and stopped on a name I hadn't touched in too long, Caleb, my brother. We'd drifted apart the last few years, life does that, you know. Work, marriage, miles between us. But if anybody'd get where I was at, it'd be him. I sucked in a breath and tapped the call button. It rang twice before he picked up. Gabriel? His voice was thick, like I'd dragged him out of sleep. Then he coughed, clocking the hour. Man, it's been ages. You holding up all right? I froze for a second, then let it out. Nah, I said flat out, but I think I'm ready to start digging for what all right even means. Caleb didn't grill me with a million questions, he just listened. I didn't unload the whole mess right then, couldn't yet, but I gave him enough. Enough for him to say, you don't have to wrestle this solo, you know. For the first time in days, I breathed easy, really breathed. He offered me a spot at his place for a bit, no strings, no big expectations, just a soft landing while I sifted through the rubble of my old life. And for the first time since I'd stormed out that door, I said yes to something that didn't have her fingerprints on it. The drive to Caleb's took a couple hours. The whole way, I kept waiting for my phone to light up, another frantic plea from her to drag me back. But it stayed quiet. Maybe she'd finally caught on that I wasn't circling home. When I pulled up to his place, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange. Caleb was out front, leaning on his truck, arms crossed like he'd been posted up a while. I climbed out, and he didn't say a word at first, just gave me a once-over, clocking the weariness I knew was etched into every line on my face. Then he nodded. Glad you're here, man. Something in my chest unclenched at that. He didn't ask if I was okay or expect me to fake it. He just got it. Inside, he tossed me a cold beer, and we parked ourselves on the porch, letting the quiet settle in easy. Cicadas buzzed out in the distance, the air warm but not heavy. It had been forever since I'd felt this kind of calm, no strain, no rush to fix anything, no burden of someone else's wants pinning me down. You second-guessing it? He asked after a while. I took a slow pull from the bottle, mulling it over. Did I? Did I wish I'd stayed in that life I'd pieced together, tied to the woman I'd loved? Nah, I said at last. I kicked myself for not clocking it earlier, but walking away. No. Feels like the first move I've made for me in a damn long time. Caleb gave a nod, like he was right there with me. Solid. And for the first time, I bought it. I didn't have the playbook figured out, didn't know what was around the bend. But for once, the days ahead didn't feel like a cage closing in. They felt like a wide-open highway rolling out in front of me, and I was finally ready to see where it'd take me.